Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Acknowledge previous speakers of their thanks to the FEC committee and their participation in the committee for the work we did with the taxation bill before us now. It has changed a little bit since it arrived at our committee, and I would like to congratulate Minister Dunn in particular, but also Minister English and Minister Power, as this is part of the negotiations with the single economic market with Australia, and they're all involved obviously in these discussions and bringing to agreement. And as Minister Dunn just noted, some changes are still to happen on the Australian side here, but the goodwill and faith is there and they will be facilitated. I also like to thank Mr. Speaker, the officials of our committee and the advice we had from IRD, and particularly our specialist tax advisor Therese Turner, and we actually now have, almost by default now, an independent drafting specialist advisor, Mr. David McClay in this instance, for this tax bill, and of course members of the Finance and Expenditure Committee, and Honourable David Cunliffe was quite right. The committee worked very well together on this bill and saw it for what we needed to do to make some changes and amendments to the legislation, or the bill at least that came before us. Mr. Speaker, I won't be doing a long speech, but just a couple of points in the bill which we'll be addressing at committee stage, I'm sure, but what was of particular interest to the submitters, I think there are about 18 of them, were the binding rulings. There's a fair bit of discussion in and around that, and solid representation from the professional sector, but particularly the branch equivalent tax account debit changes. And some quite robust submissions on those were held. I think the committee as a whole learned a fair bit about that, and we have made substantive changes to what was originally proposed in the bill that came to the committee, and generally I think we've found a pretty good solution, a common sense and fair solution, which follows intent and original notice given to the changes in those, Mr. Speaker. And another item that had a bit of discussion was the remedial amendments to the Kiwisaver. As a policy as large as Kiwisaver pans out, of course some changes need to come on the way through, but particularly the treatment for under 18s in Kiwisaver, because there were some quite strong allegations of children being signed up with not necessarily the full knowledge of their parents, and suddenly and an 18-year-old essentially making a decision for the rest of their life, being opted into Kiwisaver, and that's obviously not fair, and we had some good advice on that. Just one other thing, Mr. Speaker. I agree with most of what the previous speaker said until he got to his context part. We reject totally his allegations of a broken promise in and around super, but we'll save that for another day. I'll just leave you with one point. I'll just leave the House with one point, and that when the economy, when the government's borrowing about $14 billion a year and paying something like 5.5% for it, and it has financial assets on the other side achieving something like 4% for it, while, Mr. Speaker, there's a 1.5 quite substantial loss to the taxpayer simply to keep one organisation going here whilst trying to fund another one over here. It's like having a $400,000 mortgage and a $200,000 savings scheme, Mr. Chair. You give away the spread both ways. At the end of the day, the taxpayer's the loser there. I look forward to the committee stage of this bill, Mr. Speaker. I commend the bill to the House.